Hello, I'm going to look at the new guidance that's been published by the Scottish Government to schools about supporting transgender pupils. Now, having looked through it, there's actually not much new in it. I mean, they've had this sort of philosophy in schools for years and years, but they do make some of the things more explicit in this document. It's extremely interesting. Now, a few years ago, I made a video on YouTube about the Scottish Government's approach to transgenderism in schools. I'm covering some of the points in this video, but it was banned by YouTube. YouTube removed it, saying it was violating their policies. They didn't explain how, but they said it was. So we'll try again with this one. Now, this guidance has been published. Some people have been saying, oh, people are getting too worked up about it. It's only guidance. As if that makes any difference. If you're advising people to do things that are really harmful and immoral, then that's bad enough, isn't it? But in any case, what do they mean by guidance in the Scottish educational establishment? Just remember a story from the school where I used to work. The school used to have a rule that boys were not allowed to bring in weapons or explosives. But the inspectors came in from Education Scotland and said, oh, that's much too authoritarian. You shouldn't say it's a rule. You should say they're guidelines. It's just guidance that you don't bring weapons and explosives into school. So interpret the word guidance in that context. And if you imagine there's some sort of dispute, if this ends up in court or some sort of disciplinary matter, who's going to win? The person who's been following the guidelines or the person who hasn't? Obviously the one who's been following the government's official guidelines to schools. Now, another little curiosity on this issue. On Twitter, the Scottish Family Party have followed the Scottish Government's education Twitter account for a long time now. Sometimes we'd retweet something with a critical comment or reply to something, pointing out an alternative point of view. We've been doing that for quite a while. But then, just a few days ago, I thought, oh, let's find this new guidance. I'll go to the Scottish Government's education Twitter account. We've been blocked. So the Scottish Government's Education Department has blocked a political party in order to hinder our attempts to monitor government education policy. Now let's just think about the timing of it as well. It seems to me that it might well be that the Scottish Government Education Department deliberately blocked us on Twitter just before they released this guidance, because they knew the Scottish Family Party would be on this immediately, raising concerns about it. So they tried to delay us a bit to prevent that by blocking us on Twitter. It looked that way in any case, but one way or another, we're blocked by the Scottish Government's Education Department on Twitter. Now, looking at this guidance, there are two central problems with it. The first one is that it excludes parents from the decision-making process when it comes to gender identity issues with their own children. And the second issue is that it embodies a philosophy of sex and gender that is just wrong, and it's dangerous. It's a dangerous message to be delivering to children of any age all the way through school. And that message is leading to an explosion of cases of gender identity disorder. It's wrecking the lives of many young people. It's damaging family relationships. It's driving a wedge between parents and children and turning children against their parents. When you hear some of the guidance, you'll see that that seems to be the aim of it in many cases. And parents are more often than not seen as a potential problem. Parents either toe the line, the SNP philosophy 100%, in which case they're good parents, whereas if they don't, well, they're probably going to kill their children. Again, I'm not exaggerating. You wait and see what's coming next. Now, on this issue, there's been a lot of concern about it expressed in sections of the media, certain commentators. But it's important to distinguish between two sorts of objection to this. One type comes from what I would call cultural conservatives. They get the bit. The parents have been left out. That's not right. The state shouldn't interfere like that. Parents should be very involved in these decisions. Okay, that's fine. But when it comes to the actual transgender message bit, they're not quite sure what to say. Okay, it's a bit newfangled. They don't quite get it. 4-year-olds, that's a bit young for it, isn't it? But cultural conservatives are often reluctant to get to the heart of the matter. Why? Well, they're probably thinking, oh, it seems like a lot of nonsense to me, but they don't want to be labelled transphobic. So they don't talk about the central issue, which is the philosophy of gender fluidity, and they go for the peripheral issues instead. whereas the Scottish Family Party is a socially conservative party. Okay, we get it about parental rights, family unit integrity, absolutely. Some children are too young for these messages, absolutely. But the problem isn't that transgenderism, it's a bit new, it's a bit strange. The problem is the whole philosophy is wrong. It's based on untruths and it's harming people. That's the fundamental issue. So the Scottish Family Party is socially conservative because we understand the principles and we base our policy and our commentary on those principles. Now, some people have gone so far as to describe this guidance as child abuse. Now, I think that's an interesting take. Let's have a think about that. I thought, if you imagine a school said to a class of children in primary school, you might be a smoker, you might not be a smoker. It's up to you. And if children said, I think I might be a smoker, and the teacher said, okay, that's fine, we'll provide you with some cigarettes and you can give it a try. Don't worry, we'll keep it secret from your parents. Would that be child abuse? Let's say yes, because you're introducing children deliberately to a really dangerous activity that's likely to have pretty extreme ill effects in the future. So is it child abuse? There could be some justification for that description, I would say. But it's SNP policy. It would also be exactly the policy of Labour, Lib Dems and the Greens. The Conservatives are like the cultural Conservatives I said earlier on. They might think, parents should be involved, these children are a bit too young, whatever. But ultimately, they want to be seen as nice, and they don't particularly understand the fundamental philosophical problem at the heart of it, that the message of transgenderism is not true and it's damaging. They don't really get that. Now, there are some commentators I come across in Scotland. Maybe you read their blogs as well. Maybe sometimes from a Christian point of view in particular. They say things like, a Christian can vote for any party. A Christian can support any political party in Scotland. A Christian can join any political party in Scotland. So let's just clarify what that means. That's saying, if you say that this transgender approach is child abuse, that's saying a Christian can vote for a party whose policy is to abuse children in schools. Or a Christian can join or support any party whose policy it is to abuse children in school. How does that make sense? How does that make sense? It makes no sense to me. If I was a member of the Scottish Government, I would resign over this issue. If you don't resign over this, what do you resign on? Where is your line in the sand? What is the issue where you'd say that's just too far? I cannot support a government that enacts this. If this is not it, what is it? I'd be fascinated to hear. Right, I'm now going to turn to the guidance itself, which is very substantial, 70 pages of it, and I'm going to go through it fairly thoroughly, not all of it, obviously, but quite a few sections of it. And I'm going to try and take you beyond the sort of soundbite, sort of blog length accounts that most people will be aware of already, to look at it in some detail, and a lot of it is quite shocking. But hopefully by the end of this video you really will understand and see what the SNP is up to. Right, just a little admin point. I'm going to put some quotations on the screen next to me from now on. Now, the quotations are directly from the document. I haven't put page numbers on them because it just takes hours and hours and hours. But I will say that all the quotations I give, they are in order in the document. So if you're trying to follow through and find them, that should help you significantly. So let's look to the document. So this point's made very early on. In 2009, there were 700,000 pupils in Scotland's public schools. It's known that around 200 young people per year receive support from the Young Persons Gender Service for their transition. So what they're trying to say is, look, it's only a tiny, tiny number of young people that are affected by this. But the statistic they give there, that's 200, which is actually a lot. So they're people who are referred to the Young Persons Gender Service in a hospital, clinic, or whatever. That's really the end of the road, and those numbers will have been increasing pretty dramatically. What numbers they're not giving is the number of young people, children, who are declaring themselves to be transgender, which I don't think anyone knows the number, but if you speak to a teacher, particularly in a high school, ask them if there are many transgender pupils, I think you'll probably find the answer is that there's an awful lot in every school. Right, so the document starts with a context section. It says, this guidance has been developed at a time when there is significant public discussion about the rights of transgender people. And then that sentence reveals their total bias straight away. The significant public discussion isn't about the rights of transgender people. The significant public discussion is about the status of transgender people. Can a man become a woman? Is it a helpful thing to say to young people? They're the real things that should be being debated. But this assumption here is that the debate is about, everyone agrees that there's such a thing as transgender people. That's all uncontroversial. The debate is about whether they should be given their rights or whether they should be denied their rights. See, no effort at all to show any sort of even-handedness in this document. Right, these discussions include debate about the impact of meeting transgender people's needs and the potential impact for women and girls. We recognise that there are men who seek to abuse women, and we want women to be safe from that violence. It's not the fault of trans people, it's the fault of the abusive men. So they're just covering here the issue of men saying they're women and then accessing women's only spaces and then using that as an opportunity to assault, sexually harass, whatever, women. Now, is that a possibility? Well, there are such a thing as autogynephilic transsexuals, which would normally be a heterosexual man who is so sexually attracted to women but also wants to live as a woman. So if you've got that person using female-only facilities, that's obviously an opportunity for sexual gratification or dubious behaviour of various types, isn't it? There's obviously a genuine danger there, and that genuine danger has come to fruition in many cases. You can see them documented on the internet, including in Scotland. But note here, the violence is always committed by men. So if one of these transsexuals who self-identify as a woman, it seems like the moment they commit a crime against a woman, the moment they harass or abuse a woman, suddenly, with a snap of the fingers, they immediately become a man again. Suddenly, sex becomes objective and unchangeable as soon as a crime's committed, as soon as they do something wrong. Before then, you can declare yourself to be a woman. Quite interesting. I mean, a blatant contradiction. But hey, who cares if no one points it out in the circles that you're in, which they won't within the Scottish Parliament. You can just get away with it. Right, again, in the background part of the document, it had this little snippet. It said only 24% of LGBT young people would feel confident reporting transphobia in school. Now, normally the research that's quoted in these things, it's produced by activist organisations, and it's basically a convenient sample of people who already agree with them, of activists on their side. So it's totally meaningless. It's got no credibility at all. But even leaving that aside, right, 24% of LGBT young people, that's LGBT, so only a very small portion will be transgender, would feel confident reporting transphobia in school. Right, does anyone really believe that? Does anyone believe that? 3/4 of LGBT young people wouldn't feel that they could report an incident of transphobia. So let's say you've got a gay person and they see a transgender person being thumped or abused in some sort of way. They feel they weren't confident in reporting it. I mean, it's just got no credibility at all. They just get the answers they want in this research. Well, this is again from the introductory sections. Quotes from a trans young person. In PE, I was forced to change in a disused shower cubicle in case I stared at any of the girls. Now, so in PE, so this is basically a boy who's saying he's a girl and going into the girls' changing room for PE. Obviously, there's a problem with that, isn't there? Obviously, there's something the girls are probably going to be uncomfortable with, and there's the possibility for problems. Yet this is presented as this is something that was wrong. How could this person have been treated in this way? And you'll see throughout the document, the assumption is that the trans person sort of has to be treated as the centre of the universe. Everything else has to bend around their wishes, and their views, their wishes are paramount. And you'll see that theme developing. Again, from the introduction, they're trying to set the scene. 63% of transgender young people experience suicidal thoughts or behaviours. Yes, you find those statistics quite widely. Why is that? I would argue because gender identity disorder is a mental health problem, because trying to live out your life on the basis of a gender identity that isn't actually true is going to create all sorts of tensions within the mind. It's going to be very difficult, so it is going to lead to serious mental health consequences. But in this report, what's the problem? What causes it? LGBT young people are at a higher risk of experiencing mental health problems than other young people as a result of prejudice and discrimination, negative responses and rejection from friends, family and services. So a transgender person who's depressed, why are they depressed? It's not because they're trying to base their life on a delusion. That's not it. It's people like you and me possibly who might say, actually, we don't believe that you are a woman. You are actually a man. You are actually a boy. You're not a girl. Okay, that's what's really the problem, they say. On the same theme, these mental health problems are caused by not coming out as a result of pressures and fear of experiencing homophobia, biphobia or transphobia. So they're saying transgender pupils of all ages, what they need to do is be open about it and tell everyone and establish their public identity in a different gender than their actual sex. They're saying that's what they need to do, and it's not doing that leads to mental health problems. So, I mean, for transgender people, I mean, this is just bizarre. Basing your identity on a delusion, you're experiencing mental health problems. That obviously is not good. But they say, no, that's not the problem. Transgenderism itself is not a mental health problem. Even though it requires drugs and surgery to fix it in the future, possibly, they just state as a matter of philosophy, ideology, that that's not really the problem. It's the response of people who disagree with it or have reservations about it that is the actual problem. I mean, it's fantasy stuff. Right, human rights, children's rights. You can never get far with anything in Scottish education without coming across the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I've said before that what the UNCRC, Convention on the Rights of the Child, basically does is it empowers professionals and disempowers parents. Parents are pushed out, professionals are given more and more authority, and children are given authority certainly over their parents and to some extent over teachers as well. So let's see what they recommend from the UNCRC. All young people, including transgender young people, should be involved in all decisions affecting them, understand any action which is taken and why, and be at the centre of any decision making. Right, that all sounds fine, doesn't it? Be involved in decisions, be at the centre of any decision making. Now that's an interesting thing, isn't it? The centre of decision making. To be the centre of decision making, there are going to be some other people involved as well, haven't there? Who are these other people? Well, they must be the professionals. So it's the professionals, it's the teachers, the social workers, the doctors or whatever. We're going to get together and make the decision with the young person as well, but without parents, as we'll see later. Right, all young people, including transgender young people, have a right to a private life. Now, yes, okay, does that right sound reasonable? Yes, it does. But the way they interpret it is they have a right to keep secrets from their parents, even when the issue is one of the utmost gravity and a life-changing importance. They've got a right to a private life, so therefore parents can be kept out of it. All young people, including transgender young people, have the right to an identity, and for this to be respected. So what they're claiming here is that the rights of the child say that the child has a right to an identity, which is true. And their application of it here is that a child can choose their gender identity. That's their right, because it says so in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. End of debate. It's a child's right to say I'm a boy or I'm a girl. Really? Let's look at what the right really says. Article 8. State parties undertake to respect the rights of the child to preserve his or her identity, including nationality, name and family relations, as recognised by law without unlawful interference. Part 2 of it. Where a child is illegally deprived of some or all of these elements of his or her identity, state parties shall provide appropriate assistance and protection with a view to re-establishing speedily his or her identity. So what that's dealing with is the situation where a child is basically removed from their family, given a new name, denied access and knowledge of their family, And the right is saying that cannot be allowed. You've got to reconnect that person with their family, tell them who they really are and where they're from, etc. So it's nothing to do with transgenderism, and yet they press it into service here and make it sound like it's just a human right to be able to choose if you're a boy or a girl. But as I say, but where's the critical voice going to come from, apart from the Scottish Family Party? Well, within the Scottish educational world, probably nowhere. So they can get away with just this abuse of the legal situation. They also talk about the right to life as well for transgender people. And their implication is that if you don't support, in other words, say to someone, oh yeah, we quite agree that you're a girl now, we quite agree that you're a boy, yeah, that's absolutely great, how can we help you? If you don't take that approach, then you're undermining their right to life, because you're causing them to commit suicide. I'll come on to this later. You're causing that to happen. Right, how about this from the guidance as well? Being transgender is not a well-being concern. Now, if you're involved in Scottish education at all, you'll know that well-being is a pretty broad concept. So if a pupil turns up at school, with sunburned arms, that could be a well-being concern. If they seem a bit quiet in class one day, that could be a well-being concern. If they say they haven't had breakfast, that could be a well-being concern. But if they want to change their gender identity, then that's not a well-being concern. There are no problems associated with that as far as they're concerned. That's just perfectly normal, natural and healthy. Which is just... words fail me. Words fail me. I mean, this is an issue of such weight and gravity in a person's life, potentially life-changing, potentially life-ruining, but it's not a well-being concern, because the Scottish government's advisors, in particular the LGBT organisations, declare that it's not. They say it's perfectly normal, natural and healthy. Right, the General Teaching Council, my old friends, professional standards for Scotland's teachers. They're relevant to how teachers deal with transgender pupils as well. Let's have a look at this. This is from the GTCS standards. Teachers should treat sensitive personal information about pupils with respect and confidentiality, and not disclose it unless required to do so by your employer or by law. Again, when you first read that, you probably think, oh yeah, that's fair enough. If your teachers down the pub chatting to their pals, they shouldn't talk about like the private information of one of their pupils, should they? What has been applied to here is you shouldn't disclose this information to parents, for example, which is a different matter altogether. Now, on this topic, a while ago, we found a school in Scotland that was tweeting the gender identity and sexuality of its students. So it would have a photograph of a student, their name, and would say, oh, they've come out as being pansexual or whatever. I mean, how that fits with that guidance, I don't know. When we found that, we reported it to John Swinney, the Education Secretary, and to Education Scotland, and basically they weren't interested. They didn't care about that. But also from the guidance, trade unions. It says some unions give teachers advice about working with transgender young people and about challenging discrimination in the workplace. To which I say, excuse me, trade unions don't set education policy. Trade unions don't tell teachers how to treat our children. We're in a democracy. The government is responsible for telling teachers how to deal with children, for setting policy. Trade unions should have no role in that at all. But trade unions are part of the blob, the education, social work, government, media establishment, where pretty well everyone all thinks the same. So whether trade unions say it or not, they'll probably get the same message. But that's not the role of trade unions, to be setting policy and giving guidance to teachers. Anyway, moving on. Recognition and development of gender identity. Recognition and development of gender identity can occur at a young age. Indeed it can. Maybe about the age 1 or 2, when a baby, toddler, or whatever, thinks, hey, I'm a boy or I'm a girl. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. What they mean here is that gender confusion can occur at a young age. Gender confusion. But notice recognition of gender identity. In other words, they're saying that gender identity is objective. So as a child grows up, they might come to recognise that their gender identity actually isn't what they thought it was, and they realise what it really is. Again, completely the wrong philosophy. And so instead of treating this view, oh, I'm a boy, but I think maybe I'm a girl, instead of treating that as something that can actually be untrue or can be wrong, they're treating that as a discovery, a recognition of the truth, which is just wrong. Some young people are exploring their gender identity in primary school settings. Primary schools need to be able to meet the needs of these young people and ensure they have a safe, inclusive and respectful environment in which to learn. Okay, flannel, sound bites, waffle. This guidance is therefore applicable to primary school settings, although careful professional judgment must be applied to ensure the support offered is age appropriate. Right, age appropriate to primary school. Let's have a look at what comes next. Let's see what they think is age appropriate to primary school. Here we go. If a young person in the school says that they now want to live as a boy, although their sex assigned at birth was female, or they now want to live as a girl, although their sex assigned at birth was male, it's important to provide support and listen to what they're saying. Yes, absolutely. Listen to what they're saying, provide support. And then that support might include saying things like, that's actually not true. You're great as a boy or a girl, as you already are. There's no need to change. You'll probably grow out of it. It's just a silly fashion. Well, whatever. There were various lines you could take. But the Scottish Government guidance says this. So the child said, I was assigned boy at birth, but I think I'm a girl. The government says, if others deny this, it may have a detrimental impact on the young person's well-being, relationships and behaviour. Right, that is just plain, absolutely point blank wrong. The danger to a young person in that situation is the person who says, oh, that's wonderful. You must be a girl after all. Now, I saw research, it's quite a while ago now, that was saying that young people who end up going for gender reassignment or whatever, one of the risk factors leading them to that point is having parents who affirmed their new gender identity in the early stages. But the Scottish Government is saying you have to, in the interests of young people, you have to affirm whatever gender they happen to say they want to be or they think they are. Right, carrying on. If a young person would like changes to be made in order that they are supported to learn, then consider what is in the best interest of the young person. I mean, in order that they're supported to learn. What's this got to do with learning? I tell you, educational writing drives me nuts. They just drop in catchphrases that are just completely irrelevant, have no meaning in the context. Anyway, then consider what is in the best interest of the young person. Well, and they've told us. The Scottish Government have already told us what's in the best interest of the young person. There was only one answer to that. And the answer is always that you say, oh yes, that's fantastic. You're quite right. You're not a boy after all. You are actually a girl. Really glad you told me. That was very brave of you. Let's now work out how we put that into practice. Parents and carers play an important part in a young person's life and in any decision-making process. This is sounding promising, isn't it? Particularly for those in a primary school setting. Where possible, consider the best approach to involving and including, what's going to come next? You're expecting parents, maybe? No. The best approach to involving and including the young person in any decision making with the professionals, of course. If information needs to be shared with others, in other words, for example, parents, take time to consider the young person's view and understand the impact this decision may have on their well-being. Okay, so does the child want the parents to know or not? Don't consider what impact it will have on the parents. No, that's not a consideration at all. We've got no concern there at all. It's just about how the child is going to feel about it. How the parents feel about it, who cares? They're just parents. We're at the centre of things here. Right. In general, being aware that not every child will identify as the sex they were assigned at birth will help create an environment in which all people can flourish. Wrong. That will help create an environment where confusion can flourish. And that's exactly what's happening in Scotland's schools as we speak. Right, in primary schools, this awareness could mean using books and resources which include transgender people. We've seen some of those before. Participating in transgender commemorative and celebratory days, such as LGBT History Month and Transgender Day of Visibility, alongside other commemorative days such as International Women's Day. What that's got to do with this, I do not know. I mean, but why not? I mean, why you've got a captive audience? Why not preach a bit more of your political message? Remember, this is the primary school guidance. So if you're a parent or a grandparent of a primary school pupil, is that what you wanted to be doing at school? Today is Transgender Day of Visibility. Okay. Now, surely Anne Somerville says this doesn't promote transitioning or transgenderism, but if you're putting it in front of people again and again, keeping it at the forefront of their mind, this is a decision you need to make. Some people, they thought they were a boy, but they're actually a girl. We've just got to put that thought in your head again and again and again. Okay, that may not technically be encouraging transgenderism, but it's enabling it. It's creating the context where that sort of confusion is more likely to develop. Right, not conforming to gender stereotypes is a healthy and normal part of growing up. Should not lead to any assumptions being made that the child may be transgender or lesbian, gay or bisexual. Now that is true. Some people have accused the guidance of saying the opposite of that. But okay, so what it says there is true. On the other hand, not conforming to gender stereotypes is healthy to some extent. But if you've got, say, a boy wearing a dress, is that healthy? I would suggest it's not. I would suggest there's probably a point where the parents should say, nah, boys don't wear dresses, you shouldn't do that. Okay, don't do that anymore. Okay, that's something to leave behind now. You're a boy. Okay, so you need to dress like a boy. But they, I would imagine, would take a different view. Right, teachers should be alert to the fact that transgender young people face disproportionately high levels of bullying. Now, I'm sure that's true, but what do they class as bullying? Now, some of it might be this sort of thing. If you imagine a child at primary school turned up with a green knitted cardigan and a flat cap and a pipe, say, and the other kid said, oh, what are you doing? You dress like an old person. That's really weird. I mean, what are you doing? I don't know what's going on. Then, with transgenderism, when the boy turns up wearing a dress or a skirt or something, the other people say, oh, what are you doing? You're a boy. Why are you wearing a skirt? That's girls' clothes. Would that be recorded as bullying? Would the child be encouraged to regard that as bullying? Probably. So I think a lot of the bullying it might be more from that direction than anything more sinister. Now, I would say those sort of comments are actually part of a useful mechanism within society and within children's culture to help guide children into appropriate sort of gender identity. It's part of the process that used to exist in society that used to help avoid gender identity confusion, but that's a whole other issue. Let's keep going with the guidance. Transphobic bullying can include deliberately using the wrong name and or pronoun. Now, I heard a story from a school in Scotland where a young high school student had been bullied for a number of months by another pupil who was very unpleasant. Then this other pupil, the bully, decided to change gender and to change their pronouns and to change name. And this person who'd been bullied basically said, oh, well, stuff you, I'm not going to do what you want just because you suddenly decided after the way you treated me. So they refused to call the person by their new name, new pronouns. So what did the school do? Called the police to speak to this young high school pupil and say, we're not having any of this, you better get on and call them by the right names. So that's the sort of approach we can expect. Right, look at this next bit. CMIS. CMIS is the database system used in Scottish state schools. So it says CMIS now enables schools to record any underlying prejudice or other negative attitudes reported in an incident of bullying, including those related to a protected characteristic under the Equality Act 2010. So this is basically schools have now got a sort of miniature hate incident system within them. So if a boy comes in wearing a dress and another boy says, what are you doing? You're wearing a dress, you're a boy, what's going on here? Then that could be recorded as a transphobic incident against his name. Just like the hate incident for grown-ups with the police, obviously introducing them to the society they're going to be living in later life. Right, more guidance for teachers. Don't say it's just a phase. So if a pupil says, I think I'm actually a boy, don't say it's just a phase, as this can diminish the importance of the issue for the young person. Right, don't say it's just a phase, but actually it probably is. It probably is. And I don't know, 65, 90%, somewhere between there, different studies vary. That's the percentage of people who grow out of gender confusion through puberty. So a substantial majority just grow out of it through puberty. In other words, it's just a phase. But you're not allowed in Scottish schools to say it might just be a phase. You've got to deny the truth. Now, they grow out of it through puberty, naturally, in many cases. But of course, our sort of LGBT, well, transgender campaigners have got an answer to that, haven't they? What's the answer to children growing out of it naturally through puberty? The answer, of course, is puberty blockers. So you prevent the natural solution to the problem in order to allow the problem to persist into adulthood. I mean, how twisted can you get? But they're sowing the seeds of that here. Don't say it's just a phase, even though it probably is. Right, say to a child, ask what name and pronoun you should use to address them. Check if that's all the time or in certain circumstances. So that's just routine. So you ask them. So if someone says, I'm a boy. I think I want to be a boy from now on. I identify as a boy. They say, okay, what would you like me to call you? What pronouns would you like me to use? In other words, you induct them into transgender identity and culture. Okay. All circumstances, what do you want us to call you when we talk to our parents? What do you want to call you in class? Or is it just in our one-to-one chat? Do you want to call me that? I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. But anyway, that's what it says. Ask how things are at home. Are their family aware that they're considering their gender identity? Are they being supported at home? So this is a teacher being encouraged to have a chat with the child about their family and to rate their family. Are your family being supportive? Are they doing a good job? In other words, are they saying, we think it's wonderful that you're changing gender and we're right behind you and we're just delighted about that. What do you want us to call you, etc. That's their definition of supported. Okay. If the parents are saying, look, we're really not sure about this, we're not sure this is a good step, we'd suggest maybe, why don't you just wait a while, see how you feel, or whatever. Any parents taking that sort of line down, not being supportive. But here the teachers are encouraged to invite the pupils to judge their parents. Invite the pupils to judge their parents and to enter into a conversation about the quality of care they're receiving from their parents, which is utterly out of order and an absolute outrage. But this is the SNP. This is the party of the named person scheme. This is just more of the same from them. Right, some young people who are transgender change their name and or pronouns while others don't. Teachers should respect a young person's wishes and use the name pronoun that they have asked to be used. So in terms of pronouns, even if a teacher's thinking, you're actually a girl, you're not a boy, you have to play along. You have to speak in a way that indicates that you actually believe that they are their new gender. Okay, which for a lot of teachers will be a conscience issue because they don't actually believe that they are. But this guidance got no time for that. Just bad luck, teachers. You've got to do it. You've got to speak as though you believe that a person is their new gender. It goes on. It should be noted that anyone can change their name informally as long as it's not for a criminal purpose. The message there is, changing your name's no big deal. And they're putting this in the guidance so that teachers can say to children and young people, if you want to change what you're called, you can do that. That's entirely up to you. But when it involves or implies a change of sex, then that's a pretty big deal. So on we go. Changing name and recorded sex. If a young person wants the school to record the change of name and or change of recorded sex formally with their parents or carers, if under 16, they should write to the school to instruct this. Changing the recorded sex in CMIS has no effect on a young person's legal sex. I mean, this is just utter madness, isn't it? It's absolutely mad. So they're saying the schools should, if a boy wants to be recorded as a girl, then they should just do it. Even though legally they're a boy, we'll put a girl in your official school records. And we'll change your official recorded name. Even though your legal name is one thing, we will record something else as your official name within the school. Right, the truth is utterly irrelevant in this context. Just whatever the pupil wants, that's what can go in the school database. But what happens on exam certificates? What name goes on them? What if there's some sort of police investigation? How do they track someone down? How does the medical thing work if they don't actually have a real record of whether someone's a boy or a girl? What about when you ask a school for a reference? I mean, how's it all going to work? But who cares about all that? The whims of the pupils have to come first, and it's got to, whatever they want has to be recorded in there. Now, notice here that for under 16s, they need to get their parents' permission to change name. Obviously, the Scottish government's not too pleased about that, are they? I mean, parents involved in the system. But fear not, the Scottish government's found a loophole to exclude parents of under 16-year-olds as well. Here it is. Young people can simply choose to tell others informally that they want to use a different name. They don't have to change their name on their official school record. To keep a record of this and improve consistency in staff practice, education authority schools can update the school records held in CMIS using the known as box, which can be used to record other names a young person may use in school. Now, don't have to keep an official record, so to keep a record of it, this is what we do. So it says the message to young people is, if you want to change your name, that's absolutely fine. Any age, regardless of whether your parents have been involved, we'll change it on our records. Not necessarily the official name, but we can certainly change the known as, which is what everyone will call you, which is really the most important aspect of a name. So this is the way where they say, yeah, this is including down to 4-year-olds. If you're Peter, if you want to be called Joanne, then you let us know and we'll change your known as name to Joanne, and that's what we will all call you for now. I mean, this known as box, what it is really for is things like a boy called Jonathan who's actually known as Johnny. Or, when I was teaching, you get some Chinese pupils who would take an English language first name to use instead. That's what it's really for. But they're using it as a means of bypassing parents for changing gender, changing names for that purpose. With the correct level of CMIS, remember that's the database, administration access, such as the school's business manager or senior management team, the school can then update the name and recorded sex of young people. So senior school staff can, by divine fiat, change the sex and name of young people on the official school records. Now you may say here, this is the recorded sex. I thought we were talking about pupils changing gender. Is it not changing gender? Should it not be gender? And maybe you're thinking this doesn't really make sense. At this point, I could try and clarify with you what the terms mean and how they're used in this context. But of course, there's no point because it doesn't make sense. It's just a total tangle of contradictions. So there's no point trying to make sense of it. But it doesn't make sense. Right, so moving on. 16 and 17-year-olds. Young people who are aged at least 16 can choose to change their name in the same way as adults by changing their recorded name or with a statutory declaration of name change. In other words, 16-year-olds and upwards can legally change their name through the process. There's nothing to do with the school and also nothing to do with their parents. So this guidance, I would say, the reason this is in there is so that schools can tell pupils. So they can say to a 16-year-old, did you know, by the way, that you can just go away of your own accord and legally change your name? Okay, parents, is that what you want your children to know? So that they can go and then change their name legally off their own bat? Is that responsible advice to give to 16-year-olds? Maybe a 16-year-old girl who's got a rapid onset gender dysphoria. They straight away go and legally change their name. Is that really helpful? Well, that's what the Scottish Government is enabling. Right, back to pronouns. Typical pronouns are he or she. Some transgender young people, especially those with a non-binary gender identity, are unhappy about people referring to them as he or she. and use the gender-neutral pronoun they. Other rarer non-binary pronouns include ze or a or per, using particular pronouns as an indication of someone's gender identity. Staff should take care not to out a young person by using a pronoun which differs from the one which the young person usually uses in public. Now that's pretty difficult, isn't it? So what you've got here is a young person might say, I want you to call me Z in our private chats, but in the class, or when you're talking to my parents at the parents' meeting, I want you to call me he, for example. Now if that teacher makes a mistake, that could be a pretty major issue because the young person has been outed. And yet, is that not inevitable? I don't think our brains are really wired up to really be thinking hard about what pronouns we need, because usually it's just the most natural and obvious decision. So expecting people to remember all these things for a number of different pupils, to get it all right in different contexts, it's just not going to happen. Similarly, staff and young people should avoid misgendering a transgender young person. Using the correct pronouns is the right and respectful approach to include transgender young people. Correct pronouns. I would dispute that. They're often not the correct pronouns, it's using the incorrect pronouns, the pronouns that reflect a false belief of the child or young person. But the Scottish Government regards those as the correct pronouns. But if you are supporting a transgender young person, be led by them. As I said before, like the transgender person is the centre of the universe, everything has to bend around their wishes. Check in with them what pronoun and or name you should use and in which circumstances. This may be different depending on whether it's in public or private and may change over time. As I said, that's just impossible. It's impossible. There's going to be, even the most well-meaning teacher trying to follow the rules and do it right is going to make mistakes. And that's going to generate grievances galore among transgender pupils. Staff and young people should avoid dead naming, so that's using their previous name. In other words, referring to a pupil by the name given to them by their parents, or their official name, or their real name. But the phrase dead naming, again, this stuff's just written by transgender activists. If someone changes gender, their old self is not dead. Okay, the boy did not die, and then a girl was created in their place. So that whole phrase, dead naming, is extremely inappropriate, and I think it's melodramatic and misleading. Now, I would imagine if you're a teacher and you're reading all this, you'd be thinking, I hope there's no trans pupils in my class, because this sounds like an absolute nightmare. You're going to be treading on eggshells, and the trans pupil is going to be ready on the trigger to complain that you did it wrong at the slightest slip with any of this. Right, going on with the guidance. There's no law in Scotland which states that only people assigned male at birth can use men's toilets and changing rooms, or that only people assigned female can use women's toilets and changing rooms. This is instead done by social convention. It is indeed a social convention that's tested the test of time and is there for good reason. One of the reasons, as we talked about already, is to prevent abuse. There might be some men in particular who might abuse the situation of being in a sort of semi-private space with a woman on their own to make advances or to be abusive or harass or whatever. So yeah, that's one reason. But there's another reason as well, which I would say is to do with dignity. Bear with me. See what you make of this. If you imagine that you're at work, okay, if you go into the toilets at work, so as a man, so you go into the male toilets. So it may be that you become aware of the sound and smells of a male colleague using the toilet. Okay, it's not the most pleasant thing, but okay, that's fine. Right, the thought of being aware of the sound and smells of a female colleague using the toilet, that just doesn't seem right to me. I don't know, there's just something undignified about that. I just wouldn't like to do that. Now, I'm sure there'll be some feminists somewhere who just say, that's just yet another form of sexism. I would say it's just a form of maybe some sort of special respect towards women. I don't know, but just that's the way I feel. And I imagine a lot of people share those views as well. But all that's swept aside by the Scottish Government. Right, a transgender young person should not be made to use the toilet or changing room of their sex assigned at birth. Recognise that some transgender young people may not be comfortable using a single-sex toilet or changing room that matches their gender identity, in which case provide a gender-neutral space or accessible toilet that can be the best alternative. Again, just whatever they want, that's what they're given. Right, if young people or their parents or carers express concerns about sharing toilets or changing rooms with a transgender person, it may be because they're concerned that the transgender young person may behave inappropriately. Probably not. That's probably not their concern. We'll come on to that in a minute. Right. In this instance, schools should seek to dispel any misconceptions. A transgender young person's presence does not constitute inappropriate behaviour. Absolutely. The same as if a man goes into the women's changing room and sits there watching them, that doesn't constitute inappropriate behaviour. But still, is it the right thing to do? Should it be allowed? No, not at all. Right, if your school has a uniform, the school uniform policy should include a range of options to accommodate the needs of girls and boys, and these should also accommodate the needs of transgender young people through gender neutral options. Alright, I'm not at all sure about that. Does this gender neutrality actually contribute to gender confusion? If it was the case, the boys had to wear this uniform, girls had to wear this uniform, that from the start of the day when you're getting dressed all the way through the day, it's obvious who's a boy and who's a girl, and that the division is clear. I mean, in decades gone by, boys and girls would enter a school by different doors. They'd queue up in the playground, boys would go in through one door, girls would go in through the other door. Did that sort of procedure help to avoid gender confusion in young people? I think there's a good chance that it did, actually. There might have been something in that was helpful. Whereas the way we're going at the moment is encouraging more and more gender confusion, which we are seeing manifest in actuality. Right, if PE classes are organised by sex, a transgender young person should be allowed to take part within the group which matches their gender identity. For a non-binary young person, ask them which group they would feel most comfortable being with. Not ask the groups, remember. The transgender pupil is always like the centre of the universe. Everything has to be bended around their wishes. So what the groups prefer, well, that doesn't really come into it at this point. A transgender boy or non-binary young person who has developed unwanted breasts might bind their chest to flatten it, so they might need to wear a loose-fitting shirt. Binders can lead to shortness of breath. That's just appalling, isn't it? Can be painful during physical exertion, and there are health risks associated with wearing binders that are too tight. Remember, all of the distress that transgender people experience, it's all caused by people like me and people who are not really supportive of the idea behind it. That's the real problem. I mean, this wearing binders around your chest that makes you short of breath in order to deny your own body, that's not what causes mental health problems. It's people like me and very possibly people like you. That's what the Scottish Government thinks. Binders can, however, have a positive impact on a young person's mental health in the very short term, and so staff should allow a young person to decide for themselves about whether or not to wear a binder to help them join in. Some transgender young people may be willing to wear a looser binder than usual during PE. So again, all staff are expected to pander to endorse, to normalise the idea of breast binders, which I'd imagine a lot of teachers just find the whole idea, horrifying, just completely wrong. Not beneficial to young people at all, yet they have to go along with it and to facilitate it because the government says so. Mental health and well-being. Prevention and early intervention make a big difference in reducing the risk of developing mental health problems and in providing a positive future for young people. Yeah, prevention of gender dysphoria, preventing young people from going down the path of transgenderism. That doesn't even enter into this guidance. All the guidance is about encouraging people down that path and just leading them down that path, facilitating their route down that path, making sure no one challenges their journey down that path, which leads to a lot of mental and physical health problems. But the government sees it in exactly the other way. For certain residential accommodation, it's possible under exceptions provided by the Equality Act to treat a transgender young person differently in the provision of single-sex communal accommodation, if this is a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. This means that schools are not required to place a transgender young person in a dormitory that aligns with their gender identity if this treatment of them is a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. This will require careful consideration. Okay, so they're saying you don't necessarily have to put, for example, a boy who says he's a girl, you don't have to put them in the girls' dormitory. But the wording of that is not exactly reassuring, is it? As long as that's a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim, will require careful consideration. But if you're a teacher who's made that decision, that this boy who says he's a girl is not going to go into the girls' dorm, you'd be pretty worried. Are you sure that was proportionate? Was it a legitimate aim? Did you consider it carefully enough? You'd be pretty worried about that. Anyway, carrying on. If a transgender young person wants to share a room with other young people who share their gender identity, they should be able to do so, as long as the rights of all those involved are considered and respected. Now, you might think that's slightly contradicting what it just said. It sort of is a little bit. So the previous paragraph was saying it's not an absolute legal requirement that they're allowed to, but then this is saying they should be able to do so as long as the rights of all involved are considered and respected. Okay, let's carry on. What's this meaning? If any young person, including a transgender young person, is concerned about sharing a room with others, you should consider making alternative arrangements, including giving them their own room where appropriate. So, for example, you've got the girls' dorm, and a boy who says he's a girl is placed in the girls' dorm. So if one of the girls says, I'm not really happy getting changed or with this person watching, and I don't really want to see their male genitalia as well when they're getting changed, so I don't want that. What's the solution? The solution is you give this girl her own room. Okay, you don't say the transgender person, you can't be here, you need to have your own room. It's the girl who is got reservations who would give her own room. So if there's, say, 10 girls in the dorm and the one transgender person, then it could be that all 10 of the girls say, I'm really not comfortable with this. So they all need to be given their own rooms, and the transgender person says that. I mean, it's just the recipe for chaos here. If showers are communal, find out if there are single cubicle or private washing facilities which could be used by any young person, including a transgender young person, who would like greater privacy. So let's stick with the same scenario. So we've got a communal girls' shower and a boy who's saying is a girl going in to use that same shower with his male body parts. Okay, so that's the situation. So if a girl says, whoa, don't want this, then she has to go to a private cubicle instead. So you can end up, again, all the girls queuing up for a single private cubicle while the trans pupil is in the communal showers on their own, and probably feeling discriminated against, their rights have been infringed. I mean, it's just, who would want to be a teacher taking a trip in this sort of situation? Absolute minefield. And in terms of parents of pupils going on trips, well, I think you need to be very aware of what might be going on. Right, getting it right for every child. This is part of the government's policy for education and childcare. As part of the getting it right for every child approach, every child, young person and parent has a named person who can provide initial advice, information and support where requested, as well as access to wider support. Now you might well be thinking, named person, hang on, wasn't that knocked on the head years ago? I thought that had disappeared. Well, no. The law was struck down, but the actual scheme has just carried on regardless, which I think it's very unfortunate that the opposition to it has dissipated. But the named person scheme is alive and well, and the philosophy behind it, obviously, is still alive and well as well. Right, the named person can consider the well-being needs of the child or young person and can discuss the provision of support to address any needs, including support for transgender pupils. Where needs are identified across a range of services, there should be a child's plan where beneficial. the named person can arrange a lead professional to be responsible for coordinating and reviewing a child's plan. I mean, this is the way GERFEC, getting it right for every child, works. So if there's a child with particular needs, you bring the professionals together, and the child as well, very possibly, and produce a care plan, a plan of how they're going to be looked after. Any consideration of well-being should be holistic and based on a child or young person's family and unique circumstances. So the planning should take into account the family. Not that the family should be involved. It's not saying that here. It's saying it should allow for the family, the young person's family situation as well. Right, we've got a smoking gun here. A transgender young person may not have told their family about their gender identity. Inadvertent disclosure could cause needless stress for the young person or could put them at risk and breach legal requirements. Therefore, it is best to not share information with parents or carers without considering and respecting the young person's views and rights. In other words, you can keep it a secret with the young person, and if the child doesn't want their parents to know, you don't tell them. That's it in black and white. That's at the heart of one of the problems with this. Guidance. A transgender young person may wish to change schools as part of their transition process. Their previous name does not need to be shared with the new school. It is not necessary for all staff in a receiving school to know that the young person is transgender. What about the sports teachers? So if you're a teacher, you've got a class in front of you, you don't know if one of them's transgender or not. Is that not quite important? You're planning a trip? Well, that's just waiting to go wrong in my view. Right, then this is a quote from a trans young person. My teacher worked with me on an email which was sent to all staff to let them know about my true name and gender. True name and gender. The name they've just made up, as opposed to the name given to their parents, is referred to as the true name. And the gender that they feel that they are now is referred to as the true gender. They're really positive responses to this, which were shared with me and made me feel good. So other teachers replied saying, oh, that's wonderful. We're really glad to hear that. Thanks for sharing that. That was very brave of you. And the trans young person is saying, oh, that's great. What great teachers there are in my school. As I say, I've heard high school teachers say that there's just a string of pupils going through this process in their schools. Right, next section. Working with parents, carers and families. Right, you may say this is a bit unstructured, this report. I'm going through it in order. It is a bit jumbly. We seem to be bobbing between issues. But anyway, I'm just following it through in the order that it's in. Working with parents, carers and families. Right, a quote from a trans young person. I had to run away from my parents because they were not happy about who I am. Teachers should know that while parents should respect their child's gender identity, they don't always do so. Okay? That is quoted as an illustration of a valid comment from a trans young person. I had to run away. Not I decided to, I had to. There's no alternative. They were not happy about who I am. So you can imagine these parents saying, no, you're not a boy, you're a girl. No, I don't think it's a good idea to be declaring that you're a boy now. So that's the response they've had to their parents. They've run away from home, and the Scottish Government seems to be endorsing that decision. Right, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child explicitly recognises the central role played by parents and families in ensuring that children grow up healthy, happy and safe. It states that the family is the fundamental group in society and the natural environment for the growth and well-being of all its members, and particularly children. All its members, particularly children, should be afforded the necessary protection and assistance so that it can fully assume the responsibilities within the community. So far, so good. That's a great passage, isn't it? See what comes next then. And it goes on to recognise that the child, for the full and harmonious development of his or her personality, should grow up in a family environment in an atmosphere of happiness, love and understanding. Evidence shows that young people who have parents who are supportive of their transgender identity are more likely to have good mental health, including improved self-esteem and reduced rates of depression. Responses to a transgender young person coming out can vary, but the majority of parents and carers will want to do what is in the best interests of their child. Of course, some parents and carers may have very legitimate questions about what will happen next. Just going back, we know what supportive means. Supportive means right behind it, agreeing completely, encouraging them in their new gender identity. Most parents will want to do what's in the best interest of the child. What do they mean by that? Affirming the same thing. Some parents may have legitimate questions. Okay, in other words, they just don't understand, the amateurs. We just need to educate them a bit. Then they won't be worried about it. Others may react negatively because they have inaccurate or incomplete information. Okay, so the parent who says, I'm not sure this is a good thing for my child, it may be because basically they just know enough. They need educating by the state. Then they'll realise that their child changing gender is actually a wonderful thing. Or because they're worried about what it will mean for their child and their future. I mean, too right. Such reactions often stem from them loving and wanting to protect their child. Parents and carers may have different views from the transgender young person. If this is the case, teachers and school staff can assist by creating opportunities for the young person to have their views heard. So in other words, the role of the school is to tell the parents what the young person thinks. Not the other way around, not to help the young person to understand what the parents think, but to help the parents understand what the young person thinks. And by developing a support plan for the transgender young person in the first instance. Parents and carers may also need additional support to discuss their feelings. Again, so parents and carers, they're not presented as people who might have valid points of view that could steer the process. It's just got some feelings it might help to discuss. So the parents need managing to help them cope with their own feelings rather than actually taking seriously what they've got to say. For information on sources of support, please see, and you'll see a list of transgender activist groups who will just preach to parents the SNP's official line, basically. I was watching through the video, just checking it, and I realised I hadn't quite made the point very clearly there, so I'll just add a little section in here. This is the next day. What it's basically saying here is that children have got a right to a supportive and loving family, and if a transgender pupil has got parents who are supportive by their definition, then that right to a loving family is being fulfilled. If they haven't got these so-called supportive parents, then the child's right to a loving family is being denied. The child's right is being denied. So one would assume that in order to fulfill and satisfy the child's rights, they therefore need to be given a new family that is supportive of them. So then that's one of the most sinister passages in the whole of the guidance. Whatever the home situation, schools should continue to keep the young person involved in discussions which affect them. This could mean giving the young person the opportunity to voice opinions which differ from their parents and carers. I mean, they're just making it really explicit, aren't they? The ethos got to be, it's just absolutely fine. We quite understand that you disagree with your parents and we're on your side. Okay, what your parents think, that's a problem. We'll talk about how to deal with that, but we're on your side, agreeing with you. That's what's supposed to happen in schools. Then there's this infographic about so-called supportive parents. The statistics are from Canada. And the most striking one there is the suicide rate, where parents are supportive, and we know what they mean by supportive. Suicide attempts 4%, where the parents are not supportive 57%. Now that's pretty shocking, isn't it? So the message being given to parents is, look, you toe the line and agree with us, otherwise your child's probably going to commit suicide. Which is a totally irresponsible, it's just blackmailing the parents, bullying them into toeing the line. I mean, do you believe those statistics? I don't. I looked up the study where they came from. Participants were recruited through respondent-driven sampling. In other words, it was a convenience sample, like you put it on your website and let people sign up. Over a 12-month period, 2009 to 2010, so 11 or 12 years old, that included just 123 trans youth, 84 of whom had socially transitioned gender, or begun to, come out to their parents and provided information, reported how supportive their parents were of their gender identity and expression. So we're down to 84 transgender activists, basically, in Canada 12 years ago, that this is based on. At the bottom of the sheet, the infographic in the government's report, it says it was based on 433 responses. But it's not. And it says quite clearly, if you look at the document, it was based on 84. The organisation that put this research together, Transpulse, it also says each participant could recruit up to 3 additional participants. So when one person does it, they could get 3 of their mates to do it as well. 3 of their fellow transgender activists to give the answers that they know suit the agenda of the organisation. So basically this is old advocacy research of pitiful quality from another country, that the SNP uses it, but it's got great graphics. I mean, the graphic designer has done a fantastic job, and that graphic designer producing an attractive picture, that will be enough to convince the MSPs. I mean, the standard of debate in the Scottish Parliament it's pitiful. It's pitiful, but this will go unchallenged, I would imagine, in the Parliament. The 2 organisations that commissioned the research in Canada, one of them doesn't seem to exist anymore. Its websites are completely inactive. The other one is like it's a children's charity, very politically correct. I mean, one of the things on its website is it says, "Youth and families is a scent-free environment. We ask that you do not wear perfume at any of our locations." That's a new one on me, but knowing the Scottish Government, well, you heard it here first. How long before we start hearing that in Scotland? Right, how teachers can help transgender young people and their family relationships. School staff, including teachers, can help by working with young people to agree what they need from their parents or carers. You got that? So you sit down with a pupil, say, "Hello, John. We'd like to talk today about what you want from your parents, what you need from your parents." And then maybe we can tell them. We'll tell them what they need. So you tell us how you think your parents are doing. You tell us how you think they could improve. And it's our job to have that conversation with you, and then maybe we can help by telling your parents how they could do a better job. I mean, sadly, people voted for the SNP to be the government, despite the fact that this is the way that they think. But we are where we are. We're in a democracy. The only way out of it is for people to not vote for the SNP and vote for a party that will actually challenge this, understands the problem, and will challenge it. And that's the Scottish Family Party. Right, anyway, speaking on behalf of a young person who cannot tell their parents, carers, what they need. So like I was saying, tell the parents how they ought to be looking after the young person, according to the young person. Right, good practice. If the young person has not told their family, school staff may want to discuss the most likely reaction with the young person. This will allow the teacher and the young person to discuss whether sharing information is in the young person's best interests, and if so, what information to share and with whom. So if you imagine that discussion. So if we told your parents, how would your parents react? Oh, I don't think they'd be very keen. Okay, and then the young person and the school staff discuss a strategy of how to manage the parents, basically. Offer to arrange a meeting with parents or carers, agree this with the young person in advance of the meeting, and mutually agree key information to be shared in the discussion and by whom. So again, the teacher and the pupil plan the meeting together to see how the parents are going to be managed during the meeting. I can remember when I was teaching, I would often have this opposite sort of discussion where he speaks to the parents and say, right, we're going to have a meeting. Your son's going to be there. Let's just talk about the things we're going to cover, and we'll plan it out. Then we'll have the meeting with the boy as well. But this is the opposite. You plan it with the child to manage the parents. Right, listen to the concerns of parents and carers without judging them. Obviously, they're probably going to say some really stupid thing, but try not to judge them. Respond to concerns calmly. They're obviously going to say some really stupid things, aren't they? You'll be really annoyed, but just try to stay calm. Correct any misconceptions. But you know what parents are like. I mean, they believe all sorts of ridiculous things. So just try and educate them. Teach them from your fount of wisdom. Doesn't even entertain the possibility that the parents might have some valid points to bring to the discussion. That's just not even recognised as a possibility. Parents and carers may need time to come to terms with what their child has told them. In other words, it's not that they're actually right, that this is something concerning. They just need a bit longer to come round to your point of view. That's what parents are like. They're a bit slow sometimes, but don't worry, they'll get there eventually. If a teacher is concerned about the home environment or the safety of a young person, they should follow the school's child protection policy and procedures for recording and or acting on such concerns. Concerned about the safety of a young person, don't forget, the philosophy here is if parents are unsupportive, as it's called, I mean, the child's got every reason to run away from home, and it's sort of odds on they're going to try to commit suicide. That's the message given in this document. So therefore, should you be concerned if mum and dad are not just absolutely overjoyed that their son's now saying they're a girl? Well, it's obvious that should be a major concern and should be referred as a child protection issue. That just logically seems to be inevitable, doesn't it? Ask the young person if they plan to transition at school and if they would allow the schools some time to prepare. See, this sort of collaborative approach. We're on your side. We're going to help you through this process. We're going to help you to transition. You have no idea this. We're going to help you to think about this if it's a good idea. Just we're going to help you to implement the process. Arrange a meeting with parents, carers and or outside agencies as required if the young person is happy for this to take place. I know it's a bit repetitive, but just to emphasise that this is definitely the position. Parents are kept in the dark unless the young person says yes, they would actually like them to be involved. Right, in 2017, Education Scotland published guidelines on what it expects to be covered through health and wellbeing. That's a misnomer if ever you heard one. It notes that learners working in level 2, that's age sort of 8 to 11 and higher, should be able to demonstrate an understanding of diversity in sexuality and gender identity. So right from primary school they're taught the sort of radical ideology of sexuality of LGBT activists. Now, Murdo Fraser, the Conservative MP, when he was just tweeting about this report, he said, it says sex assigned at birth. That's a lunatic concept. That's from the lunatic fringe. But Murdo Fraser needs to realise that children in Scotland are taught this philosophy as fact in primary school and secondary school. It's been taught to a whole generation. And the Conservative Party is not opposing it. It's just got nothing to say about it. Right, additionally, young people notice the things that schools don't mention. Excluding transgender voices, identities and topics in schools, even unintentionally, when young people already know about them, can send out a negative message. The best approach is to ensure transgender identities and experiences are explicit within subject-specific experiences and outcomes. In other words, in maths, in English, in every subject, there needs to be some sort of reference to transgenderism, transgender characters, messages, whatever, in every subject. I mean, it's bizarre. These are activists making the most outrageous demands, and the Scottish Government just rolls over and says, yeah, whatever you say, we'll do it. So that's what they're doing. So if your children are at school, just bear in mind, this is what they're going to be getting. Posters and displays. Transgender identities should be included alongside other identities in classroom school displays. This is to ensure transgender young people feel respected and included in their learning environment. Examples are provided below. Both these posters, you can see, include celebrating, not about accepting or respecting or treating decently or whatever, celebrating. If you celebrate something, you acknowledge its positive character. So changing gender is a wonderful thing. That's what has to be communicated to young people in schools. Now, the Education Secretary says this is not promoting transition, but it's celebrating it. It's a pretty fine line, isn't it? One of the posters there says gender is not boy-girl with a lock in the middle. I would say, well, ideally it is. So that message is completely wrong, damaging and harmful to young people. But that poster will be in classrooms around the nation. I mean, most schools already, so half the walls are wallpapered with LGBT propaganda. The report also recommends the creation of LGBT student groups, because obviously if you've got something like rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is widely acknowledged as a social contagion, just girls in particular, they hear about other people who are doing it, their friends doing it, so they do it. So setting up a group like this is perhaps not a good idea when you're going to gather these people together. So there's every opportunity for this social contagion to spread. among them. But anyway, that's what the report recommends. Right, school staff concerns. So if you get a teacher who's not actually totally on board with this whole idea, if school staff raise concerns about an inclusive approach, in other words, these staff, what they're saying is schools should not be inclusive. There must be pretty nasty people. What people do they want to exclude from school? Dear me, these are pretty bad people, aren't they? They just need stamping down. The management team should make it clear that the school has obligations to support all young people and has a duty of care to ensure the safety, health and well-being of all young people, including transgender young people. That just infuriates me, that statement. As though these staff who've got concerns, what they need reminding is that the school has to care for people and ensure the safety, health and well-being of young people. As though that's it. So these staff who are objecting, they must think the school hasn't got a duty to look after safety, health and well-being. They're just such horrible people. They don't care about young people. Not that they've got some relevant concerns. They don't care. And they need to be told that they have to care. And that's the sort of line. I've heard about staff who have raised concerns with the head teacher, say, and this is the sort of reaction that they get. It's just outrageous. I would hope any staff who get that sort of reaction respond strongly and explain exactly why that is outrageous and insulting to receive a reply like that. I'll touch on this later, but I hope some teachers have got the courage to do that, to push back against this. Right, it carries on. If a teacher wants to know more about their professional responsibilities, their union, I've said already what unions have got to do with this, I do not know, the GTCS, I'll try that. I actually wrote to them and said, what is the situation if a teacher has conscientious objections to teaching about transgenderism in the way the government wants? And GTCS inevitably replied, avoiding the issue, it's up to the educational authority, anything but giving a straight answer. Or where applicable, the local authority can provide this. Okay. Now, I would suggest that every teacher in Scotland who looks at this guidance and just thinks this is wrong, raise a concern with your school. The more teachers do it, that will get fed back up through the system, and who knows, it might make a difference. Now, you may say it would make no difference. It's just going to make hassle for yourself. Yeah, but some things are a matter of principle, and it's just your duty to express your concern about it, because what's at stake here is the integrity of families and the well-being of young people. It's not okay to say, well, it's probably not going to help my career, it might be a bit awkward for me, so I'll keep my head down. In my humble opinion, that's not good enough. You have to say something. Right, parent and carer concerns. Parents and carers' concerns should of course be taken seriously, even though obviously they're probably a bit stupid. But right, if parents or carers of another young person at the school raise a concern, it can be helpful to meet with them to discuss this further. In general, the school's response should be framed in the context of equality for all young people while being mindful of the school's confidentiality policy. In other words, no possibility they might have a point, because the parents just don't get equality. It's really that simple, according to the government. The next steps could include: take time to listen to their concerns, explain that the school has an inclusive ethos and is committed to equality and inclusion. So the parent's concern might be very specific and very valid, but the response has got to be like bland sound bites. That's what it says, government policy. Right, address any misconceptions they have. You know what parents are like. They've got all sorts of wrong ideas. The Age of Legal Capacity, Scotland 1991. This act states that a child of 12 or over is presumed to have sufficient capacity to make decisions and enter into formal agreements on their own behalf. This includes to instruct a solicitor, to sue on their own behalf, and to consent to their own medical treatment. 12-year-olds. And to enter into transactions usual for a child of that age. That law is wrong. It's wrong. It undermines parents, and it places responsibilities on young people that they shouldn't have at that age. It's an irresponsible and wrong law. Of course, it's existed throughout that period with no opposition from any party in the Scottish Parliament. They're all not interested, but it needs repealing. That needs sorting out. Okay, you show me another political party in Scotland taking any interest in that. You won't find one. But we think that needs to be fixed. It's at the heart of the problem. Right, books. Suggested books for primary schools. Are you a boy or are you a girl? Who are you? Again, they're encouraging questioning, planting doubt in young people's minds. I've talked about that issue before. Suggested books for secondary school. The Art of Being Normal. Okay, rethinking normal. Normalizing gender change, gender fluidity. I would argue that it's not normal, natural and healthy, but they want to persuade people to do this. And the other book there, Beyond Magenta. Transgender Teens Speak Out. Right, that book I will go on to in a minute. Let's look at the bottom of this page in the government's report though. It says, please note, the use of documentaries and books should be reviewed in advance to check where the content is age and stage appropriate. So the government says, before you use a book, you have to check it, read it and check that it's suitable. And then on their list is a book that they clearly haven't read and check that it's suitable. Right, their book, Beyond Magenta, is spoken about by this lady here.
This transgender book contains graphic descriptions of pedophilia, and it could be in the youth section of your library. I know it's in mine. Beyond Magenta, Transgender Teens Speak Out is a compilation of first-hand accounts by transgender teens. It's incredibly explicit and inappropriate. I found this one being promoted in the youth section of our library. It describes atrocious violent behaviour without apology and illegal pedophilic actions without qualification. Rigid stereotypes are given as the reason some of these teens felt they're in the wrong body. One boy says, when I was 4 or 5, I wore girls' clothes. So what? That doesn't make anyone a girl. He goes on to say that someone challenged him out on the street about wearing a dress, and he asked, why not? And the response was, because you have a dick. What's a dick? I didn't know what one was. Well, the guy said, the boys have dicks and girls have pussies. The conversation continues along these lines. Charming stuff for your young teenager to be reading, don't you think? The F word is littered throughout the book as well. Another account describes a kid being so mad he pushed his pregnant teacher to the ground. He said, I knew he shouldn't have done it, but he was justified, and said it a number of times that he was just mad. Well, that doesn't make it okay. But far worse is the graphic descriptions of oral sex. A couple of stories include this. Let me read this for you. From 6 up, I used to kiss other guys in my neighbourhood, make out with them and perform oral sex on them. I liked it, and I touched their you-know-whats. He goes on to describe sexual exploits with girls, masturbation and pedophiles. There's no mention that this is illegal and incredibly harmful behaviour. It's simply a part of the account describing why this person is transgender. The damaging nature of these activities is alluded to as the story unfolds, but nothing specifically calls it out. This is not appropriate material for an adult, let alone teenagers. And this book is being promoted to youth in some libraries.
I mean, you couldn't make it up, could you? I mean, I sometimes get frustrated when people won't believe just how bad the things are that the Scottish Government is doing and producing. But I can sort of understand it. I mean, if I heard that story, my first reaction would probably be, I don't believe the government would recommend a book like that. Surely not. Especially when it says underneath, it's really important you read things and check what's in them is appropriate beforehand. But it is the truth. This is the SNP in action. Right, almost there. One last thing. There's some scenarios at the end of the guidance. What do I do if a young person wants to change their name and sex on the official record system of a school? CMIS. Points to consider. There is no reason why a transgender person's name and sex cannot be changed on a school information management system. Wrong. There are reasons why that shouldn't be done. Parents don't want it, and it would constitute a dramatic life-changing step, possibly on the basis of a transient phase a pupil is going through. Let the young person know that changing their name, their CMIS record, means that any letters sent home will effectively out them. So you say to the children, again, this conspiratorial approach, okay, you can change your name if you like, but if you do, just bear in mind that's what will go in the official letters to your parents, then your parents will know. Are you sure you want to do that or not? Or shall we keep it secret from your parents? And that sums up the Scottish Government's approach. Right, so hope you found that interesting. So to conclude, you know more about this report now than probably almost any MSP journalist or teacher in Scotland, and it is evil. It will damage children and families on a large scale, and what's called for in this situation is courage and not apathy. Now, we're in a democracy, but this is what people have voted for. This is what the SNP was already doing. They voted for the SNP again, and they're in a game, and they're carrying on doing it. So we've got to get beyond apathy, and the political system needs to reflect the concerns of a very substantial part of the Scottish population, and the way that's going to happen is through the growth of the Scottish Family Party. So do join us to support our campaign to bring these issues into the political arena and to make a change. You can join us via the link below from just £4 a month, and I would urge you to do that right now. Thanks for watching.